Greetings loyal subscribers and honoured guests. I have another episode of RetroGrade this week, and I'm sticking with the Konami arcade classics for now to take a look at the highly addictive Time Pilot. As always, I'll be starting off with the original arcade version and then taking a look at some of the home ports. Konami released the game in their native Japan in 1982, but when it was distributed in the West it was initially brought over by Century. You take control of the titular Time Pilot and your ship is fixed at a point in the middle of the screen. You are able to rotate left and right and fire, and that's pretty much it as far as controls are concerned, so this is an extremely easy game to figure out and get into, which is one of the things I like about it. Your goal is to take down a fixed amount of enemies. Doing so triggers a boss fight, and once you've destroyed the boss you will warp through time through the next level. Things start off in 1910 where you'll be fighting against biplanes, before moving on to 1940 and more advanced fighters, helicopters in 1970, fighter jets in 1982, and finally UFOs in the far off future of 2001. Should you kill the boss of 2001, the whole game will loop around to the beginning again and get slightly harder. Being a pretty early arcade game, Time Pilot is nothing amazing to look at these days, but is still a lot of fun to play thanks to the fast-paced action and easy controls. Other than a little bit of music as you start up the game, there aren't really any tunes to speak of. Most of the sound comprises of the pew-pew of your guns, heat-seeking missiles being launched at you by the pesky helicopters of 1970, and the whir of chopper blades, that sort of thing. There are certainly other deeper shoot-'em-ups that have come along since, but Time Pilot still holds a lot of appeal to me, and I would give it a score of 4.5 time machines out of 5. Now let's take a quick look at the Atari 2600 version. By 1982 this console was starting to get a bit long in the tooth, and its lack of power really shows in this port. There are far fewer enemies on the screen by necessity, and the whole thing just looks rather ugly. The lack of targets really affects the challenge of the game, making it a bit too easy and therefore unexciting to play. It's not really the fault of the hardware, this is probably about the best that could be done on the console. With far better versions available, I don't know why you would ever choose to play this one though, other than nostalgia or curiosity. Unfortunately, I have to award it a score of 1 time machine out of 5. Let's move over to the MSX next. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the MSX computer, it was an 8-bit hardware standard that was designed by Microsoft and then licensed out to various companies to produce their own machines. It became quite popular in Japan and parts of Europe, but never really made an impact in the United States or the UK. Konami were big supporters of the computer, and games like Metal Gear made their debut on the hardware. This is a decent version of Time Pilot. It's obviously not a match for the arcade version, but it is one of the better ports that I'm looking at today. The scrolling of the screen could be a little smoother and the graphics are lacking in detail, but it plays well and is light years ahead of the pitiful Atari version. I'm going to award a score of 3 time machines out of 5. That's it for the official ports, but there were a few bootleg versions that I'm also going to take a look at. Space Pilot on the Commodore 64 by Kingsoft is sadly a bit pants. The enemy sprites are huge and ugly. Instead of well-defined biplanes and choppers, you get stretched out eyesores. What truly kills this version is the terrible slowdown and sprite flicker though. There's just too much happening and the poor 64 can't handle it all. I'm sure that a decent version of Time Pilot could have been done on the C64 in the correct hands, but this definitely isn't it. They didn't even get the mechanics of the game right, because instead of having to take down a certain number of enemies to make the boss appear, you have a time meter that ticks down. If it weren't for the existence of the Atari version, this would be the worst one by far, but as it stands it is the second worst port, earning a score of 2 time machines out of 5. Finally we come to the BBC Micro bootleg, also called Space Pilot but unrelated from the C64 version. This version was coded by Superior Software of Repton and Citadel fame. Other than the controls being mapped to really awkward buttons on a modern day keyboard, caps lock and left control, this is a really excellent rendition of the arcade game. It runs super smooth, has some really nicely defined sprites, and the gameplay is all present and accurate to the original game. This also happens to be the version of Time Pilot that I'm most familiar with. I actually owned it back in the days before I got a C64, when our BBC Micro was my main gaming machine. I used to be pretty good at it back then, but thanks to the controls I wasn't able to get very far today. I'm sure that after remapping the keys I would get a lot further though. Definitely the best version of the game by far, and thoroughly deserving of 4 Time Machines out of 5. So there we have it. Next time I think I may be taking a look at a console original rather than an arcade game, and only one version at that, so make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell if you want to be updated when I release new videos. In the meantime, take care.